You're listening to Dear Gen Z, real stories, raw advice, and timeless lessons from the generations before us. Each week, we sit down with someone who's lived a little longer to bring you insights on life, love, purpose, and everything in between. Because sometimes the best advice doesn't come from social media. It comes from those who've been there.
Hey guys, welcome back to Dear Gen Z. I'm your host, Sean Modi, and today we're talking about something that often doesn't get enough attention, the power of your mind. We all know how important physical training is, whether it's sports, school, or even your career. But what about mental training? Confidence, focus, resilience, and the ability to perform under pressure can make all the difference, not just on the field, hardwood, or ice, but in everyday life. To help us dive in, I'm joined by sports psychologist Adam Carter, who has worked with athletes to strengthen their mindset and perform at their very best. He's seen firsthand how mental strategies can turn setbacks into comebacks and how lessons from sports psychology apply far beyond athletics. Adam, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate you having me and really excited to dive in.
Yeah. To start off, I'd just love for you to share a little bit about your background and how you found your way into sports psychology.
Yeah, man. So, growing up, I feel like I played pretty much every sport under the sun. Played soccer, football, hockey. After high school, I did a lot of powerlifting. I did some boxing. Tennis is sort of my sport of choice right now. And I feel like throughout it all, there were definitely opportunities that I felt I missed out on because of a fear of making a mistake or a fear of being injured. Growing up, right away, I had a pretty harsh introduction to injuries. When I was pretty young, I broke my femur playing soccer. I was trying out to walk on with the local university football team, and I tore my pec when training for that. And so, whether it was before those injuries or during or after those injuries, I always felt that I was holding myself back. And then when I got into school and I discovered psychology, and I think I'm a pretty curious person. I like to learn new things. So that really piqued my interest. And then I learned about sports psychology. And I'm like, no way, I'm a sport nut. I used to know every sports stat under the sun. Now, as a dad and with full-time jobs, I can't spend as much time doing that. But it really seemed like something that kind of blended my enjoyment and my love of sports, as well as, my curiosity to learn, as well as, my love to help others, and to see them live the best life that they can, and perhaps not repeat the mistakes I've made. So a bit of a combination of a lot of things, but at the end of the day, my love for sports, my love for helping people, and my curiosity with learning new things.
That's awesome. So I just wanted to dive into the athletic mindset to kind of kick off the main segment of this episode. So one thing I wanted you to tell us is, what do you see as the most common mental challenges that athletes face, like confidence, performance anxiety, setbacks, etc.?
Definitely, I would say an expectation to perform and to get a certain result. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the times that starts off from other people's expectations, because I don't think when any of us play a sport for the first time, we do so to score 30 goals in a season, or we do it to, get 15 shutouts in a season. I think we end up playing our sport first and foremost because we love it, we enjoy it, we notice ourselves getting better, all of those really, intrinsic motivations. And then somewhere along the way, there's expectations from others to perform, there's expectations from others to reach a certain level, there's expectations to get noticed by certain scouts or coaches. And so I just think athletes feeling like they need to live up to the expectations of others is something that I would say 95% of athletes that I work with is their kind of root cause of any of their mental blocks or mental challenges.
And do you have any stories or examples, maybe from your experience or experience with clients, that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately a lot of times coaches, although maybe well intentioned, put expectations on their athletes to perform to a certain level. I have so many hockey players and soccer players where heading into a game, a coach will go up to them and say, you know what, we're really counting on you today. We need a win. It's kind of all on you. And I think what the coach is trying to do is to motivate the athlete and for them to sort of believe in themselves. But what they're doing is like adding an immense amount of pressure on them to be the guy in the game. And I think everybody wants to be the guy. That's not the issue here. Everybody wants to be the guy and dominate and live life to their best on the field or on the ice. But it's when we feel like we have to live up to somebody else's expectation of that, where that really makes us crumble under pressure. So, like I said, big moments, big matches, finals of a tournament. I see a lot of athletes struggle with living up to that pressure under the moment.
And do you think that maybe it's not the coaches or the parents of the athletes that cause this issue? Like, for example, at least when during high school season or club season, I would always put the pressure on myself because I had the expectation, like coming off like a good game or a big win, I would have the expectation for myself, like, oh yeah, maybe this is like a crappier team or not so good, like their defenders aren't so great, and then I put the expectation on myself to score a bunch of goals or have a bunch of assists or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So do you think that sometimes it's the athletes putting the pressure on themselves rather than the coaches doing it?
Definitely. I think self pressure is a huge thing. Going back to your example, Sean, I think it's an interesting topic around like what it means to have a good game. Because if somebody judges a good game based on stats and results and goals and assists and points and all that stuff, there's a lot of pressure to live up to that because it's not something that we can like necessarily control. So we feel like we have to go in there and do everything perfectly in order for that to happen. But I know we've talked about this before when we have maybe a definition of success or a definition of a good game that's more rooted in what we can control. Like, hey, I'm going to go out there and give it my all. I'm going to go out there and have a great attitude and be a good teammate. I'm going to go out there and use my reset routine or whatever it is to bounce back from a mistake. I think that's still a good game. I think that's still performing to the best, but it's doing so in a way where we can control those things, right? Nobody can stop you from doing any of those things. And so there's a lot less pressure involved with having those as our sort of three benchmarks of performance.
Right. And I was just want to touch on another problem that kind of has to feed off of that, and that's setbacks, right? Now, sometimes when people underperform in a game or have these big like goals for themselves, they and they underachieve, it really like frustrates them, right? The frustration, the setbacks, the failure, it really gets them. And then their self-belief and their confidence starts to dwindle a bit. So how do you recommend going about a setback or a failure? Because I know some people use it as anger for the next game. Some people use it as motivation to go maybe to the gym at 5 in the morning. And some people just let it get to them and it really like kills their confidence. So how do you recommend going about that?
It's a good question because we can't avoid mistakes and failures are going to be there. I think part of the answer is it's a little unique to each individual athlete. Like what gets us motivated and what gets us going changes person by person. Like you mentioned, some people might look at mistakes as a learning opportunity. Some people might look at mistakes as like a bit of a chip on their shoulder. So I would recommend to any athlete out there to like try a few different things like after a mistake, like try for a few games to like really journal and write out like, hey, why did this mistake happen? What can I learn from it? What can I do better next time? Maybe there's some athletes out there who, like you said, would benefit better from a more of like a motivating stance to it. But I also wanted to touch on because you mentioned confidence and a lot of athletes, they feel like their confidence decreases after they make a mistake. One of the things, Sean, I've been thinking about a lot lately is I think the whole idea of confidence is kind of overrated and overstated because a lot of us wait to feel confident in order to do something. But in reality, it's actually doing the thing that leads to confidence. An analogy I use a lot of my athletes is let's pretend you and I are at a swimming pool. Maybe now it's still September, so the water's kind of warm still. It's still swimming weather. We go to swimming pool now, but the water's kind of cold. And, we say, hey, we're not going to jump in until the water warms up. Well, we're going to be waiting on on the sidelines forever, right? We're never going to jump in because the only way the water warms up is by us jumping in. And then our body gets used to it and it warms up and whatnot. I think confidence works the same way in sport. A lot of people are like, oh, I made a mistake here. I don't feel confident anymore. Like, I need to get confident again in order to go out and make a play or make a move. Well, if you wait to feel confident, you're going to be waiting for the rest of your life, right? Confidence comes from like going out there and actually doing the thing that you want to do. So, to go back to your original question around mistakes and how to handle it, I know part of what I said was it's a little bit dependent on the athlete and kind of what drives them internally and how they view mistakes. But I think every athlete can benefit from understanding, like, yeah, your confidence is going to take a dip in the moment. That's understandable. But that doesn't stop you from actually going out and doing the thing that you want to do. Like, don't wait to feel confident again to go do it. Just sort of commit to taking that action the next time you have an opportunity to do so.
Right, and that's interesting how you say it. Like it varies athlete to athlete, right? Because like I would have teammates that would make a mistake and then like next play down go like absolutely obliterate someone's ankle on a slide tackle, or like me personally, I would make a mistake and it would get to me for a couple of minutes and then I'd be able to move on. But then some people make a mistake and the next play down the field they score a goal. So it really does vary athlete to athlete, and that's kind of how I wanted to feed into this next segment. Like each athlete prepares for a game in different ways, or after a game, they deal with the result in different ways. So how are different tools like maybe visualization, routines, and etc. Like how does that vary athlete to athlete, and what are a couple of tools that you talk about with your clients on how to maybe prepare for a game or reflect after a certain game?
Definitely. I'll start with the reflection one because that's one I'm a little bit more passionate about. I think the most underutilized tool in mental performance and athletic performance is journaling and reflecting after not only a game but a practice as well. That's a big mistake athletes make is like, oh, I'm only going to reflect after a game. I don't need to reflect after a practice. Well, when we do that, we're telling ourselves that the game is more important than the practice. And if we tell ourselves the game is more important than the practice, we put more pressure on ourselves in a game versus a practice. So, I'm a huge advocate for athletes reflecting after any time they go onto their field of play, whether it's a hockey rink, soccer field, whatever it is. We don't want the reflection to feel like homework. Guys like you, Sean, you got enough homework already throughout the week and the days. So we don't need any extra homework. Like, let's keep it like 2 to 5 minutes max type of thing. I think if an athlete after a practice or a game, they reflect on like, hey, what was my mental state? Like, was I aggressive and, was I relaxed? What were my feelings like? I think reflecting on, hey, did I use the tools I wanted to use, like my reset routine, my mental prep? And then also like, did I do my process and reflecting on the process, right? Instead of like, hey, did I score 3 goals this match? It's, hey, did I do my best to create chances? Or, hey, instead of, did we get a shutout this match? It's like, hey, did I compete as hard as I can on defense? So that's how I approach the after the game stuff and sort of the routine of reflecting on a match. I know you asked about before a match as well. Mental prep is a huge component of performing well because it's almost like a cheat code and you get extra practice or reps before the game actually happens, right? Because I know we've talked about this before where when you visualize or you do imagery, the same parts of your brain activates as if you were actually doing it. So that's why I consider it like extra practice that nobody else gets. So I always ask my athletes to visualize 3 different types of things before they play. One being, what are the actions you want to do so that you feel more in the zone and you feel more in that flow state when it comes time to play? Number 2, what are the things you want to bounce back from and visualizing that bounce back? So like, hey, visualizing, a coach yelling at you and how you respond to it. That's going to really help you not overthink when you're in the moment. And then the third one is visualizing all the past success that you've had. Because when we do that, it really increases our self-belief and it reminds us of how good and how amazing we are. And it gives us the self-belief that we can go and replicate that in whatever is coming up next.
Right. Yeah. And that was interesting how you said flow state, right? Because not only does that happen in sports, but that can happen in all aspects of life, right? That can happen in school, maybe when you're taking an exam and you're like, you studied the night before and you're super locked in, you get into the flow state, you remember everything you need. Or you're in a job interview, you get in the flow state, they ask you a question and you start answering everything super smooth and it goes super well. So, how do you recommend that people, or specifically athletes, take these lessons and these tips like the visualization or how to come back from a failure? How do you recommend that they implement this into their day-to-day lives?
So I think a lot of times less is more when you're starting out. So people, I think, will try and dive in right away of like, hey, I'm going to do this huge hour-long routine in the morning to get in the zone and meditate and go ground myself and all this stuff. And then at night, I'm going to, journal for an hour and reflect on my day. Like, I think we should really consider starting small. Like, hey, wake up, write down three things you're grateful about. Start your day with some gratitude. Write down three things you want to accomplish that day. Start to set your priorities for the day. Have that list with you, reflect on it throughout the day. At the end of the day, journal, hey, how did my day go? Did I do what I wanted to do? What am I excited about tomorrow? So I guess to come back, to the original question, Sean, I think anybody, whether they're an athlete or not, can take 2 minutes of journaling in the morning and 2 minutes of journaling at night. So that's what, 4 minutes in total. And they can get some pretty profound, positive effects from just doing those things. Just by orienting yourself to what's important to you and what matters to you, you automatically kind of block out the noise and the things that maybe we once thought were important to us, but in reality are not that crucial to our lives.
Right, and I'm just a little curious myself. Like, are there any of these tips and techniques that you recommend for athletes that you use in your daily life? I heard you say you play tennis, but maybe outside of tennis, right? Like for your work or your family or anything else. Like, do you use these tips your day-to-day life to help you maximize your potential?
Yeah, so one of the quick tips that I have that we haven't really touched on yet is sort of the idea of like an alter ego. This idea that like, we have different versions of ourselves that we step into depending on the situation we're in, right? Like I'm sure for you, Sean, how you act in class is different than how you act when you're at home. It's different than how you act on the soccer field. It's different than how you act when you're with the boys, right? Like there's different versions of Sean um, that come out in different situations. And so that's kind of how I approach my life as well. And one of the things that we work on with a lot of our athletes is something called a totem. A totem is just sort of like a physical object that has a bit of a special meaning behind it that helps you kind of lock into that version of you that's best suited for that situation, right? So, for example, when I'm in sessions with my athletes, like I'll wear glasses, like just these pair of glasses here. And it's like a way for me just to kind of like lock in and have that kind of like coach persona on it, right? Um, when I'm spending time with my family, I'll put on like, my wedding ring from me and my wife. And that's like a remembrance to me to lock into that version of myself. When I play tennis, I sort of think about my tennis shoes and I'm like very intentional of like putting them on and tying the knots and lacing them up. So I think having a physical object or symbol that helps you kind of switch personas and lock into how you want to show up in that day is really helpful because, for the glasses, for example, when I'm a coach, there's a lot of traits I want to have. I want to be curious. I want to be, present. I want to be smart, obviously, and intelligent, and I want to be thoughtful and responsive to the athlete. If I try to think about all those things at once, I'm going to start overthinking myself. But I just have a pair of glasses that basically captures all of those traits. I think glasses, be a coach, and I'm locked in as that sort of version of myself.
Right. And that's like kind of interesting because I do that like unintentionally sometimes. Like in class, I'll use a specific pencil, or like if I'm out with my friends, like I'll wear like a bracelet or whatever. And then in soccer, like, like I would always wear the wrist tape and then write a message or two
Mm-hmm.
on it. So that's something that a lot of people overlook, and I feel like people don't really do. And
Hmm.
maybe if they do it, it's kind of unintentional, but they should start maybe doing it with a purpose now, because if you have a purpose behind it, it'll change your mentality. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, it's something that's, concise and really captures a lot of information in something that's like small and easily digestible, right? Like, the message you write on your wrist, there's probably so much meaning behind that message and so much history built up behind it. If you try and think about all those things at once, it's going to have the opposite effect than what you intended, right? So it's just like, hey, one thing that helps us lock in and sort of switch modes. Like I said, for you, it's a message on your wrist tape when you're on the field. For me, it's my tennis shoes when I step onto the court. I would really encourage everybody for the different areas of their life to have a totem attached to it. I think it's going to make that switch and that lock in a lot more effortless for them.
Right. So I just wanted to get through a couple quick rapid fire questions that I'm personally curious about. So the first one I had is, if you had 30 seconds before a big moment like a presentation, a game, something, what is your go-to tip or routine?
My go-to tip would be to set a goal and to remind yourself why you're there. Because when we remember why we're doing something and the love for it or how we can grow from it, then that automatically flushes away a lot of the nerves.
Right. Yeah. Something my dad taught me, like it, I've altered it a little bit, but he like recommended like right before something, take a deep breath and then just like exhale it all like really quick, like. But then me,
Mm-hmm.
I put my Sean twist on it, so I like breathe in and just scream as loud as I
Mm-hmm.
can, like right before a big moment, and it actually helps. So I feel like if
There you
people
go.
had something quick like that they could do before every big moment, that would really help them out. But I wanted to get to another one. What is, in your opinion, the most underrated mental skill that pays off in sports and life?
Definitely dealing with pressure because everybody feels pressure at one point or another. I think everybody tries to avoid pressure, but in reality, if we feel pressure, that means that we've earned it. Feeling pressure means you're doing something that matters to you. Having pressure or feeling pressure means that you're doing something that is meaningful and that you've worked hard to get to that moment. So whether it's, pressure of performing in a big game, whether it's pressure of, presenting in front of a big crowd or pressure of like getting a certain score on a test, um, that pressure that you feel, you've earned it. And rather than avoiding it, when you recognize you earned it, and again, try not to think about the word confident too much, but when you earn pressure, that kind of like increases your confidence in a way. It makes you feel good about where you're at.
Right. And then just the last kind of quick question I wanted to get at. You brought up confidence a couple times and you said confidence is overrated. But something I've heard quite a bit is there's a fine line between confidence and cockiness or arrogance. So where do you think that line is drawn between confidence and cockiness?
I think that fine line is really drawn from like the intentions behind why you're doing something. Like I think somebody who's sort of like overconfident or cocky, it's always like me in a team aspect. They put them before the team. But I think somebody who's confident as part of the team, they put the team before themselves. Because I think about, in soccer, for example, somebody who's confident, they go out there and they make the passes they need to make and they make the plays they need to make and they sort of make the team better around them. Whereas somebody who's overconfident or maybe cocky, it's all about themselves and they actually make the team around them worse. And so I think that's actually a unique way of looking at it of like, hey, am I making the people around me better or making them worse? I think that's a good insight on if the actions that you're taking are rooted in confidence or cockiness.
Right. That's awesome. So we're running out of time for today's episode, but as always, I just wanted to get to the your biggest piece of advice for Gen Z listeners on the topic of maybe mental pressures, like sports psychology, and maybe how to apply it to real life.
I think a lot of Gen Zers, they feel a lot of pressure and expectations to have their life figured out as soon as possible. And what that does is really strips them of experiencing the adventure that comes from discovering life, right? Like I think adventure is all about the thrill of the unknown, the thrill of doing something unfamiliar, the excitement of like not really sure what the next step is, but I'm willing to find out. And so I think when we try and figure things out ASAP and so quickly, and like by our first year university, have our whole life planned out, we strip ourselves of so much adventure that we're missing out on. So I guess my one piece of advice would be to don't figure it out too quickly and and get excited about what's ahead.
It's really powerful. All right, guys. Well, that's it for today's episode of Dear Gen Z. I hope this conversation gave you a new perspective on how powerful your mindset truly is, not just on the field, hardwood, or the ice, but in everyday life. Big thanks to Adam for sharing his insights and breaking down how we can all win our mind. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to follow the podcast, share it with a friend who could use a mental boost, and leave a review. It really helps spread the word. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.